The silence in the great assembly hall was so complete that Jin-Ho could hear the soft humming of the station's air systems. Every alien in the enormous room was staring at the human delegation, waiting for some kind of response to Elder Vexathari's terrifying story. Jin-Ho felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon him and knew that whatever he said next could determine humanity's future in the galaxy. Ambassador Min-Su started to stand up, clearly preparing to give some kind of diplomatic response, but Jin-Ho held up his hand to stop him. Something was bothering the captain about the Elder's description, and he needed to understand what these shadow stalkers really were before making any official statements. Dr. So-Young was studying her notes with a confused expression on her face. She had been comparing the Elder's description with her knowledge of Earth's predators, and something was starting to make sense in a very strange way. The behavior patterns, the stealth abilities, and even the cruelty the Elder described all matched. Something very familiar from Earth. Jin-Ho made a decision that would shock the entire galaxy. He activated his personal communicator and sent a message down to his ship. The device crackled to life and his voice carried clearly through the silent hall, even though he spoke in a normal tone. Choi Soo-bin, this is Captain Jin-Ho. Please bring Nabi up to the station right away. Use the small transport carrier and meet us in the Great Assembly Hall. The aliens did not understand the human language, but they could tell from Jin-Ho's calm voice that he was requesting something to be brought. To them, whispers started spreading through the crowd as different species tried to figure out what the humans were planning. Some of the smaller aliens moved further away from the human section, while others leaned forward with curiosity. Dr. So-Young realized what Jin-Ho was doing, and her eyes went wide with shock. Captain, are you sure about this? If I am right about what these shadow stalkers actually are bringing, Nabi here could cause a panic that might get us all killed. Commander Kim Tae-won also understood what was happening, and his hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. He was not planning to use it, but the gesture made him feel slightly better about what might happen in the next few minutes. Sir, I think I know what you are thinking, and while it might prove our point, it could also start a war. Jin-Ho looked at his team members and then at the thousands of aliens watching them. He knew the risk he was taking, but he also believed that honesty was the best way to build trust with these new species. If humans were going to be part of the galactic community, they needed to be truthful about who they were and what they lived with on Earth. Ambassador Min-Su tried one more time to stop what was about to happen. Captain, perhaps we should discuss this privately first. We could request a recess and meet with the council leaders to explain the situation before taking any dramatic actions. But Jin-Ho had made up his mind. We have spent months preparing for this moment and practicing what we would say to make a good impression. But I think the truth will serve us better than any prepared speech. These beings deserve to know exactly who they are dealing with. 20 minutes passed in tense silence. The aliens continued to whisper among themselves while the humans sat quietly waiting. Elder Vexathari remained on the central stage watching, the human delegation with his glowing yellow eyes. His expression was unreadable, but Jin-Ho could sense that the old Saurian was both curious and worried about what the humans were planning. Finally, the main doors to the assembly hall opened, and Engineer Choi Soo-bin entered carrying a small gray transport carrier. She walked calmly down the aisle toward the human section, completely unaware of the tension in the room. The carrier had mesh windows on the sides, and something small and dark could be seen moving inside. The reaction from the aliens was immediate and intense. Several species in the front rows actually stood up and backed away from the aisle. The crystalline beings from Xerion Prime began flashing their lights in what appeared to be a panic pattern. A group of the floating jellyfish creatures started moving rapidly toward the exits, making high-pitched sounds of distress. Choi Soo-bin reached the human delegation and set the carrier down on the floor in front of their seats. She looked around at all the aliens who were staring at her with obvious fear and confusion. I brought Nabi like you asked, Captain, but I think there might be some kind of emergency happening here. Should I take her back to the ship?" Before Jin-Ho could answer, the creature inside the carrier made a soft sound that carried clearly through the silent hall. It was a small, gentle meow, but the effect on the alien audience was explosive. Half the species in the room immediately fled toward the exits. The crystalline beings actually shattered their light into bright fragments of panic. Several of the smaller species fainted and had to be caught by their companions. Elder Vexathari stumbled backward on the stage, his scaled face showing pure terror. "Impossible!" he shrieked in a voice that cracked with fear. "You have brought a shadow stalker into this sacred place. You are all dead beings walking among the living." Choi Soo-bin looked at the panicking aliens and then at her captain with complete confusion. "Captain, I do not understand what is happening. Why is everyone so scared of Nabi? She is the sweetest little cat we have ever had on the ship." The word cat sent another wave of terror through the remaining aliens. Those who had not yet fled pressed themselves against the walls as far away from the human section as possible. Some species were making sounds that their translators could not even process because they were too close to screams of pure fear. Nabi, who had been sleeping peacefully during the journey up from the ship, was now awake and curious about all the noise around her. She let out another small meow and began pawing at the mesh window of her carrier, wanting to see what was happening outside. Choi Soo-bin, completely unaware of the chaos she had caused, opened the latch on the carrier and gently lifted out a small black and white cat. Nabi was barely 4 kilograms of fur and whiskers with bright green eyes and a pink nose. She stretched in Soo-bin's arms and yawned, showing tiny white fangs that made several aliens scream in terror. "This is Nabi Soo-bin," announced cheerfully to the horrified audience. "She is 3 years old and loves to chase laser pointers and sleep in sunny spots. She also keeps the mice away from our food storage areas and purrs when we pet her." The concept was so impossible that several of the alien translation devices actually shut down, unable to process what they were hearing. The idea that humans not only lived with these ultimate predators, but actually kept them as companions, was beyond anything the galactic species could understand. Ambassador Throx of the Mechanical Collective spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. You control these shadow stalkers. You have found a way to dominate the galaxy's most dangerous predators." Dr. So-Young stood up, still holding her research notes. "Control is not the right word," she said calmly. "We live together in partnership. We provide them with food, shelter, and medical care. In return, they give us companionship and help us with pest control." Nabi chose that moment to begin purring a sound that rumbled through the silent hall like the engine of some massive machine. The vibration made the remaining aliens cover their hearing organs in terror. To them, the purring sounded like the growl of a massive predator preparing to attack. Elder Vexathari was shaking so hard his robes were rustling. But the hunting behavior, the cruelty, the intelligence. How can you live with creatures that torture their prey for pleasure? Commander Kim Tae-won finally understood why the Elder's description had seemed familiar. "Sir, with respect, what you call cruelty, we call play behavior. Cats on Earth do bring us small animals they have caught, but they are trying to teach us to hunt because they think we are bad at it. When they play with their prey, they are practicing their natural hunting skills." The revelation was too much for many of the remaining aliens to process. The concept that the galaxy's most feared predators were actually trying to help the humans by teaching them to hunt was so alien to their thinking that some species simply could not accept it as possible. The Unity Hub space station was bigger than anything Captain Lee Jin-Ho had ever seen before. It stretched across space like a metal city floating among the stars. Thousands of lights blinked on its surface, and ships of every shape and size moved around it like busy insects. Some ships looked like giant eggs, while others were shaped like long tubes or spinning wheels. Each one belonged to a different alien species from across the galaxy. Jin-Ho stood on the bridge of his ship, Terra's Hope, and watched through the main window as they got closer to the station. His hands were shaking just a little bit. This was the first time humans would meet with the Galactic Council officially. Everything had to go perfectly. Behind him stood Ambassador Kang Min-Soo, who was wearing his best diplomatic uniform. The man looked calm, but Jin-Ho could see worry in his eyes. Next to Min-Soo was Dr. Park So-young, who kept looking at all the different alien ships with excitement. She was the team's expert on alien life and had been studying every species they might meet today. Commander Kim Tae-won stood near the door with his hand resting on his weapon. He was there to keep everyone safe, but Jin-Ho hoped they would not need any fighting today. As their ship moved into the docking bay, Jin-Ho could see alien workers guiding them to their parking spot. The workers were tall and thin, with blue skin, and 4 arms each. They moved quickly and smoothly as they helped the human ship find its place among all the other vessels. When the docking was complete, Ambassador Min-Soo straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. The whole team had practiced this moment many times, but actually being here felt completely different. They were about to represent all of humanity to hundreds of alien species who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, longer than humans. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the humans stepped into Unity Hub for the first time. The air smelled different here, like metal, and something sweet that Jin-Ho could not identify. The gravity felt normal, which was good, because the station builders had made it comfortable for most species. The docking area was huge and filled with aliens of every type Jin-Ho could imagine. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, while others crawled on many legs or floated in the air. There were beings made of crystal that sparkled as they moved, and others that looked like living plants with flowers for heads. A group of what looked like giant jellyfish drifted past them, glowing with soft purple light. Many of the aliens stopped what they were doing to stare at the humans. Some pointed with whatever they used for hands, while others made sounds that might have been talking. Jin-Ho noticed that most of the aliens seemed nervous or excited to see them. A few even backed away when the humans walked past. A robot guide met them at the entrance to the main station. It was silver and moved on wheels instead of legs. When it spoke, its voice came out in perfect human language, even though it sounded like it was coming from inside a metal box. Welcome humans to Unity Hub. I am Guide Unit 7, and I will take you to the Great Assembly Hall where the Galactic Council is waiting for you. Please follow me and do not touch anything that glows red, as it may be dangerous to your species. The robot started moving, and the humans followed it through long hallways filled with more aliens than Jin-Ho had ever imagined could exist. The walls were covered with symbols and writing in hundreds of different languages. Some parts of the station were darker for species that did not like bright light, while other areas were filled with colored lights that hurt human eyes to look at directly. As they walked, Jin-Ho began to notice something strange. The aliens were not just curious about humans, they seemed scared. Groups of them would whisper among themselves and then look at the humans with what appeared to be fear in their eyes. Some aliens actually moved to the other side of the hallway when they saw the human delegation coming. Dr. So-young noticed it too and moved closer to Jin-Ho to whisper, "Captain, there is something wrong here. Look how they are acting around us. They are afraid, but I do not understand why. Humans have not done anything to hurt any of these species." Jin-Ho nodded, but kept walking. He had noticed the same thing and it made him worried. Maybe some aliens thought humans were dangerous because they came from what many species called a death world. Earth was known throughout the galaxy as a planet with extreme weather, deadly animals, and diseases that could kill most alien species easily. They passed through several more sections of the station, each one designed for different types of alien life. One area was filled with water for species that needed to swim, while another was kept very hot for beings that came from desert planets. The variety was amazing, but also overwhelming for the human visitors. Finally, they reached the Great Assembly. Hall and Jin-Ho stopped breathing for a moment. The room was enormous, with a ceiling so high he could barely see it. Thousands of seats were arranged in circles around a central stage, and almost every seat was filled with a different type of alien being. The noise from hundreds of conversations in dozens of languages was almost too loud to bear. Guide Unit 7 led them to a special section marked for the human delegation. As they walked down the aisle to their seats, the entire hall began to grow quiet. Thousands of alien eyes turned to watch the humans, and the whispers started again. Jin-Ho could feel the weight of all that attention and tried to keep his face calm and friendly. When they reached their seats, a new figure appeared. On the central stage, it was tall and covered in dark green scales with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the bright lights. The creature wore robes covered in symbols and moved with the careful grace of someone very old and important. This was Elder Vex Thari of the Saurian Empire, and Jin-Ho knew from his briefings that this being was one of the most respected members of the Galactic Council. When Elder Vexathari spoke, his voice carried clearly through the hall, even though he did not seem to be shouting. Welcome, beings of the galaxy, to this historic gathering. Today we meet the newest species to join our great community. The humans of the planet Earth have requested to become part of our galactic family, and we are here to learn about them and decide if this is wise. The elder paused, and his yellow eyes seemed to look directly at the human delegation. When he continued speaking, his voice carried a tone that made Jin-Ho feel cold inside. But before we welcome these humans, we must discuss something very serious. Something that could put every species in this galaxy in terrible danger. The humans come from a world that harbors the most deadly predator known to any civilization, a creature so terrible that it has destroyed entire worlds and wiped out species that had lived for millions of years. The hall became completely silent. Even the translation devices seemed to stop humming. Jin-Ho felt his heart start beating faster as every alien in the enormous room turned to stare at the human delegation with what was clearly fear and horror in their eyes. Elder Vexathari raised one of his scaled hands, and the great assembly hall became even quieter than before. Jin-Ho could hear his own heartbeat in the silence as thousands of alien eyes watched the Saurian leader prepare to speak. The old creature's yellow eyes seemed to glow brighter as he began his tale. Long ago, when the galaxy was younger and many worlds were just beginning to explore space, there lived a peaceful species called the Verdani on a beautiful planet named Zenkalar. The Verdani were gentle beings who looked like walking trees with flowers for hair and leaves for skin. They spent their days growing gardens and creating art from living plants. For 10,000 years they lived in perfect harmony with nature, on their world. The elder's voice grew darker as he continued. Then one day, without warning, the shadow stalkers appeared on Zenkalar. We still do not know how they arrived or where they came from originally. Some believe they came on ancient ships, while others think they somehow traveled through space on their own. What we do know is that within 3 of their planet's seasons, every single Verdani was dead. Dr. So Young leaned forward in her seat, trying to understand what the elder was describing. She had studied many predator species from different worlds, but nothing in her research matched what he was talking about. The way he spoke made these shadow stalkers sound like something from a nightmare rather than a real animal. The shadow stalkers were unlike any predator we had ever encountered before. They moved without making any sound at all, even when walking, on dry leaves or broken glass. Their fur was marked with stripes and spots that made them invisible in shadows and tall grass. When they hunted, they became like ghosts that could appear and disappear without warning. Captain Jin-Ho felt a strange feeling in his stomach as he listened. Something about this description seemed familiar, but he could not place what it was. Commander Kim Tae-wan was also listening carefully, and Jin-Ho noticed that his security chief looked confused rather than worried. But the worst part about these creatures was not their hunting skills. It was their cruelty. The shadow stalkers did not kill quickly like most predators do when they need food. Instead, they seemed to enjoy causing pain and fear in their victims. They would catch smaller creatures and play with them for hours before, finally ending their lives. Sometimes they would bring their prey to safe places just to let them think they had escaped before attacking again. The elder paused and looked around the hall. Many of the alien species were making sounds of fear and distress. Some of the smaller beings had actually hidden behind their larger companions. The crystalline creatures from Xerion Prime had dimmed their lights until they were barely visible in their seats. After the Verdani were destroyed, we thought the Shadow Stalkers would stay on Zenkalar and leave the rest of the galaxy alone. We were wrong. Somehow they spread to other worlds, and each time they appeared, the result was the same: total destruction of any intelligent life they encountered. Elder Vexathari activated a holographic display above the stage that showed images of different planets. Each one looked dead and empty, with ruined cities and no signs of life. The images changed slowly, showing world after world that had suffered the same fate. The insectoid hive queens of Chittar Prime were next. These beings had billions of warriors bred specifically for fighting and defending their colonies. Their soldiers had armor harder than metal and weapons that could cut through solid rock. But when 50 Shadow Stalkers appeared on their world, the entire civilization fell within 2 years. 50 creatures destroyed billions of trained warriors. Jin Ho exchanged glances with his team members. The numbers didn't make sense unless these Shadow Stalkers had some kind of advanced technology or supernatural powers. But the Elder was describing them as biological creatures, not machines or energy beings. The aquatic depth singers of Oceanus thought they would be safe because they lived deep underwater in cities built on the ocean floor. The Shadow Stalkers had never shown any ability to swim or breathe underwater. But somehow they learned. Within months, they were diving to incredible depths and hunting the depth singers in their own element. An entire species that had mastered the oceans for millions of years was extinct in less than 1 planetary year. Dr. So-Young was taking notes on her tablet, trying to record every detail the Elder shared. The behavior he described was definitely that of a highly intelligent predator, but some aspects seemed impossible. No single species could adapt that quickly to completely different environments unless they had help from advanced technology. The worst case happened on Harmony 7, where the Melody Birds lived. These creatures were small and beautiful, with voices that could create music so lovely it brought peace to any being that heard it. The Shadow Stalkers did not just hunt them for food. They seemed to understand that the birds' singing brought joy to other species, so they would capture the birds and keep them alive just to prevent them from singing. They would torture these gentle creatures not for any survival purpose, but simply because they could. Commander Kim Tae-won shifted in, his seat looking uncomfortable. Something about the Elder's description was bothering him, but he could not figure out what it was. The behavior sounded familiar in a way that made him think of something from his own experience. Every species that encountered the Shadow Stalkers tried different ways to fight them or escape from them. The Mechanical Collective built robots, specifically designed to hunt these creatures, but the Shadow Stalkers learned to avoid the robots and attack only when the machines were not around. The gaseous beings of Nebula Station tried to hide in their cloud forms, but somehow the Shadow Stalkers could see them even when they were invisible to every other species. The holographic display showed more images of destruction and empty worlds. Each picture told the story of another civilization that had been completely wiped out by these mysterious predators. The variety of species that had fallen to them was incredible, from tiny, fairy-like beings to massive creatures the size of buildings. What made the Shadow Stalkers truly terrifying was their intelligence. They did not attack randomly like wild beasts. They studied their prey, learned their habits and weaknesses, then struck at the moment when their victims felt safest. They could wait for days or weeks watching and planning before making their move. Some survivors reported that the creatures seemed to enjoy the fear they caused and would deliberately let some prey escape just so they could hunt them again later. Elder. Vexathari's voice became almost a whisper as he reached the end of his tale. In total, the Shadow Stalkers have been responsible for the complete extinction of 12 intelligent species across the galaxy. Billions of beings have died because of these creatures. Every world they have touched has become a graveyard where nothing intelligent dares to live. The Elder turned his glowing yellow eyes directly toward the human delegation, and his next words sent chills through Jin Ho's entire body. And now we discover that these monsters come from the same world as our newest potential members. The question we must ask ourselves is this: can we trust a species that shares their planet with the galaxy's most deadly predators and somehow managed to survive? Dr. So-Young looked around at the terrified aliens and made a decision that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. She realized that words alone would never convince these beings that humans could safely live with what they considered the ultimate predator. They needed to see the truth with their own eyes. "I think a demonstration would be more helpful than explanations," she announced calmly. "With your permission, Captain, I would like to show everyone here exactly how humans and cats interact on a daily basis." Jinho nodded his approval even though he could see the panic in Ambassador Minsu's eyes. The diplomatic consequences of what they were about to do could be enormous, but they had already come too far to turn back now. Dr. So-Young gently took Nabi from Choi Subin's arms and walked toward the center of the human seating area. The remaining aliens pressed themselves even further against the walls as she moved closer to them with the Shadow Stalker in her hands. Several more species decided this was too dangerous to watch and headed for the exits. Nabi looked around at all the strange creatures surrounding her with curious green eyes. She had never seen so many different types of beings before, and her natural feline curiosity was making her very interested in everything around her. She made a small chirping sound that cats often make when they see something exciting. The sound sent another wave of terror through the alien audience. To them, it sounded like some kind of hunting call that the predator was using to communicate with other shadow stalkers that might be hiding nearby. Several of the mechanical species began scanning the room with their sensors looking for additional threats. Dr. So-Young sat down cross-legged on the floor of the assembly hall, making herself as non-threatening as possible. She placed Nabi gently on the ground in front of her and reached into her pocket to pull out a small piece of string. This was something she always carried because she knew how much cats love to play with moving objects. She held one end of the string and began moving it slowly back and forth in front of Nabi. The cat's pupils immediately dilated, and she crouched down low with her tail twitching behind her. To the watching aliens, this looked exactly like the hunting posture that had been described in so many terrible stories about shadow stalker attacks. Several more species fled the hall in terror. Those who remained were frozen in place watching what they were certain would be a deadly attack on the human scientist. Elder Vexathari was gripping the edge of the stage so hard that his claws were leaving marks in the metal. "She is preparing to strike," he whispered in a voice full of horror. "The human does not understand the danger she is in. We must evacuate the station before the creature calls for backup from others of its kind." But instead of attacking Dr. So-Young, Nabi suddenly pounced on the string with all four paws. She rolled over on her back, holding the string against her chest, and began kicking at it with her hind legs in a playful manner that looked nothing like the deadly hunting behavior the aliens expected. The watching beings could not process what they were seeing. This was supposed to be the galaxy's most dangerous predator, but it was acting like a kitten playing with a toy. The disconnect between their expectations and reality was so extreme that some aliens wondered if this was somehow a different species that just looked like a shadow stalker. As you can see, Dr. So-Young explained while Nabi continued to play with the string, They have retained their hunting instincts, but in a domestic environment, this behavior becomes play rather than actual hunting. She is practicing her skills, but she has no intention of harming anyone. To demonstrate her point even further, Dr. So-young lay down on her back on the floor, making herself completely vulnerable to attack. This was the most dangerous thing anyone could do around a predator because it exposed all the vital organs and made escape impossible. The remaining aliens gasped in terror, certain they were about to witness the human's death. Elder Vexathari actually started moving toward them as if he planned to try to rescue Dr. So-young from her obvious mistake. But Nabi simply looked at the human lying on the ground and decided this looked like a comfortable place to rest. She walked over to Dr. So-young and climbed up onto her chest, where she began kneading with her front paws. The motion looked to the aliens like she was testing the softness of her prey to find the best place to deliver a killing bite. She is checking for weak spots in the human's defenses, someone shouted from the back of the hall. This is exactly how shadow stalkers prepare their victims for the final attack. Instead of attacking, Nabi simply curled up on Dr. So-young's chest and began purring loudly. The deep rumbling sound filled the hall and vibrated through the floor, making it seem like some massive engine was running somewhere beneath them. To the terrified aliens, it sounded like the growl of a creature preparing to feed. Dr. So-young remained perfectly calm and relaxed, even with the supposed ultimate predator, lying directly on top of her most vulnerable body parts. She even reached up with one hand and began gently stroking Nabi's fur, which made the cat purr even louder. Commander Kim Tae-won decided to join the demonstration. He walked over to where Dr. So-young was lying with Nabi and sat down beside them. Then he reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small bag of cat treats that he always carried because he knew Nabi liked them. Nabi, he called softly, holding up one of the small fish-shaped treats. The cat's head immediately lifted, and she looked at Kim with bright, interested eyes. She carefully climbed down from Dr. So-young's chest and walked over to Kim, where she sat down politely and looked up at him with an expectant expression. The aliens watched in amazement as the deadly predator simply sat and waited patiently for the human to give her the treat. There was no aggression, no threatening behavior, and no sign that she planned to attack anyone. When Kim held out the treat, Nabi took it very gently from his fingers, being careful not to use her claws or teeth on his skin. You see, Kim explained to the stunned audience they respond to kindness and consistent care. On Earth, billions of humans live peacefully with creatures like Nabi. We feed them, give them warm places to sleep, and take them to doctors when they get sick. In return, they provide us with companionship and help keep harmful pests away from our food supplies. Dr. So-young sat up and continued the explanation. What you call the shadow stalker's cruelty, we understand as their natural instinct to practice hunting skills and to try to teach us what they think we need to know about survival. When a cat brings a dead mouse to a human, they are not being cruel, they are trying to provide food for someone they care about. Choi Subin joined the group on the floor, and Nabi immediately went to her and began rubbing against her legs in the way cats do when they want attention. The engineer scratched behind Nabi's ears, which made the cat close her eyes in pleasure and purr even more loudly. She also likes to sleep in sunbeams that come through the ship's windows, Subin added. Sometimes we find her lying upside down in the strangest positions because she fell asleep while playing. She is definitely not the terrifying monster you have been told about. The few aliens who remained in the hall were struggling to understand what they were seeing. Everything they thought they knew about shadow stalkers was being challenged by the evidence in front of them. This small creature was clearly the same species that had destroyed entire civilizations, but she was acting like a friendly pet rather than a deadly predator. Elder Vexathari slowly made his way down from the stage, his legs shaking with confusion and lingering fear. But the hunting behavior, he said in a weak voice. The stealth abilities, the intelligence. How do you explain the destruction of so many worlds? Jinho stood up and faced the elder directly. Sir, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about exactly what happened on those worlds and how these cats might have gotten there. Because what you are describing sounds like our cats, but the behavior you witnessed was probably very different from what you see here today. The demonstration had accomplished exactly what Dr. So Young had hoped. The aliens could no longer deny that humans somehow live peacefully with creatures they considered to be the ultimate predators, but they still did not understand how this was possible or what it meant for the future of galactic civilization. Dr. So Young stood up from the floor, still holding Nabi, who was now completely relaxed and purring softly. The few remaining aliens in the great assembly hall watched with fascination and terror as the human scientist prepared to reveal something that would change their understanding of the galaxy forever. "We need to discuss something very important," she announced to the gathered beings. "Earth is not just home to small domestic cats like Nabi. We also share our planet with much larger versions of the same species, and they are probably the ones you encountered on those destroyed worlds." She activated a holographic projector that had been built into the human seating area, and suddenly the air above them filled with images of Earth's big cats. Lions with their golden manes appeared, first followed by tigers with their distinctive orange and black stripes. Then came leopards with their spotted coats and jaguars with their powerful builds and beautiful markings. The reaction was immediate and intense. The few aliens who had stayed to watch the demonstration with Nabi now stampeded toward the exits in complete panic. The images of these massive predators were exactly what they remembered from the stories of planetary destruction and genocide. Elder Vexthari collapsed into a nearby chair, his scaled face showing pure shock. Those are the Shadow Stalkers," he whispered. "The exact creatures that destroyed Zenkalar and all the other worlds. But you said they come from your planet. How is this possible?" Dr. So Young nodded as she watched the holographic display cycle through dozens of images showing Earth's various cat species in their natural habitats. "These are what we call the big cats. And yes, they are the same species. Family as Nabi, just much larger and still living in the wild. Somehow cats from Earth have spread across the galaxy, probably through ancient space travel, or maybe they are just incredibly good at surviving in different environments." Captain Jin Ho activated his personal data pad and began displaying Earth's historical records. The information appeared on the main screen, where everyone could see it. "Cats have been living with humans for over 9,000 years, he explained. "They chose to live with us originally because we provided steady food and warm shelter. We chose to live with them because they protected our food stores from rodents and other pests that could destroy our crops. The numbers that appeared on the screen were incomprehensible to the alien observers. Earth currently had over 600 million domestic cats living in human homes as family members. The idea that any species would willingly share their living space with hundreds of millions of apex predators was beyond anything the galactic civilizations could understand." "Ambassador," Minsu finally found his voice after being silent through most of the demonstration. "The cats you encountered on other worlds were probably either wild cats that somehow traveled there on ships or domestic cats that had to return to hunting for survival when they were separated from human care. Without humans to provide food and shelter, they would naturally return to their predator instincts." Dr. So Young continued her explanation, while Nabi dozed peacefully in her arms. "The larger cats, the ones that destroyed your worlds, are what we call wild cats. On Earth, we have learned to coexist with them too, though we maintain a respectful distance and do not try to domesticate them like we do with smaller cats." She activated another series of images showing human researchers working with tigers and lions in wildlife preserves. The footage showed humans tracking and studying these massive predators while maintaining safe distances and using protective equipment. The images looked like pure madness to the alien observers. "We study them, protect their habitats, and work to ensure their survival," she explained. "Some humans dedicate their entire lives to understanding and protecting these creatures. We recognize that they are dangerous, but we also understand that they are an important part of Earth's ecosystem. Commander Kim Tae-won added his own perspective. The behavior you described as cruelty is actually how cats practice their hunting skills and teach their young to hunt. When they play with their prey, they are not being cruel, they are following instincts that have helped them survive for millions of years. The problem is that when wild cats encounter species that did not evolve alongside predators, the results can be devastating. Elder Vexathari was shaking his head in disbelief. But your entire species lives alongside these creatures. How do you survive? How do you sleep at night knowing that the galaxy's most dangerous predators are living in your cities and homes? Dr. So Young smiled and held up Nabi, who opened one green eye to look at the Saurian elder before going back to sleep. Because they chose us just as much as we chose them. Domestic cats like Nabi have been bred for thousands of generations to live with humans. They have retained their hunting instincts, but they direct those instincts toward helping us rather than harming us. The concept of mutual partnership with an apex predator was revolutionary to the galactic species. Most civilizations had achieved dominance through technology or collective behavior or by eliminating dangerous species from their worlds. The idea that humans had instead formed a symbiotic relationship with their planet's deadliest hunters was completely alien to their way of thinking. Choi Subin spoke up from where she was sitting on the floor. Nabi wakes me up every morning by purring and rubbing against my face. She follows me around the ship and sleeps on my bed at night. When I am sick, she stays close to me and seems to know that I need comfort. She is not just a predator, she is a friend and companion. Ambassador Throx of the Mechanical Collective processed this information through his mechanical brain for several long moments before speaking. Your species, he said slowly, domesticated, the Shadow Stalkers. You turned the galaxy's most feared predators into household companions. Actually, Dr. So Young corrected, they domesticated themselves. Cats chose to live with humans because we provided advantages they could not get on their own. Steady food sources, warm shelters, protection from larger predators, and medical care when they were injured or sick. In return, they provided us with pest control companionship and even emotional support. The idea that the relationship was based on mutual benefit rather than domination was even more shocking to the aliens. They had assumed that humans must have some kind of advanced technology or special abilities that allowed them to control these dangerous creatures. The reality that it was a partnership based on trust and mutual advantage was beyond their understanding. Jin Ho stood up and addressed the few remaining aliens directly. What you need to understand is that Earth is what many species call a death world. We evolved alongside creatures that most galactic species would consider impossibly dangerous. We learned to coexist with predators because we had to in order to survive. This gave us a different perspective on what it means to share a planet with dangerous creatures. Dr. So Young activated one final holographic display that showed Earth's incredible biodiversity. Images of sharks, wolves, bears, venomous snakes, and hundreds of other predators filled the air above them. Each creature was deadly in its own way, but humans had found ways to study, understand, and coexist with all of them. We do not see cats as monsters, she explained. We see them as partners who have helped us survive and thrive for thousands of years. The cats that destroyed your worlds were probably scared, confused, and trying to survive in environments they did not understand. Without human partnership, they returned to pure predator behavior, because that was the only way they knew how to stay alive. The revelation changed everything the galactic species thought they knew about humans and about the creatures they called Shadow Stalkers. These beings from Earth had not just survived alongside the galaxy's most dangerous predators, they had formed bonds with them that lasted for thousands of years. The implications for galactic civilization were staggering, and would require completely new ways of thinking about coexistence and survival. 3 months had passed since the historic meeting at Unity Hub, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what it meant to have humans as members of the galactic community. News of humanity's relationship with the Shadow Stalkers had spread to every corner of known space, fundamentally changing how other species viewed both humans and the creatures they had feared for so long. Captain Jin Ho was sitting in his quarters aboard Terra's Hope reading reports from across the galaxy when his communication system activated with an urgent priority message. The holographic display showed a being he had never seen before, but immediately recognized from his briefings as one of the surviving Verdani. The creature looked like a walking tree with silver bark and leaves that shimmered like metal in the light. Flowers of different colors grew from what appeared to be her head and shoulders, creating a beautiful but alien appearance that was both plant and something more than plant. "Captain Jin Ho," she said through the universal translator. "My name is Botanist. Prime Leaf Whisper and I speak for the Verdani Restoration Project. We are the survivors of our species who escaped Zenkalar before the Shadow Stalkers destroyed our civilization. We have been living in exile for over 200 years, waiting for a chance to return to our home world." Jin Ho leaned forward in his chair, giving the plant being his full attention. He had read about the Verdani tragedy and knew that only a few thousand members of their species had survived the destruction of their planet. They had been living on borrowed space in other species' territories, never able to find a world suitable for their unique biology. "We have a request that would have been impossible before we learned of your unique abilities with these creatures." The Verdani's voice carried a tone of hope that had probably not been heard from her species in centuries. "We want to go home, Captain, but we cannot do so while the Shadow Stalkers control our world. We formally request human assistance in negotiating with them." The request was unprecedented in galactic history. Never before had one species asked another to help them communicate with what everyone considered to be mindless predators. But the demonstration at Unity Hub had proven that humans had a special relationship with these creatures that no other species could understand or replicate. Jin Ho activated his ship's communication system and called for Dr. So Young to join him in his quarters. When she arrived a few minutes later, still carrying Nabi, who had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy, he explained the Verdani request. Dr. So Young studied the planetary data that Leaf Whisper provided through the communication link. Zenkalar appeared on the holographic display showing a world that had once been covered in beautiful gardens and artistic structures made from living plants. Now it was overgrown with wild vegetation and clearly inhabited by large predators that could be seen moving through the ruins of Verdani cities. "It is possible," she said after several minutes of analysis. "The cats appear to be thriving on Zenkalar, which suggests they have established a stable ecosystem. If we approach this correctly, we might be able to work out territories where both species can coexist safely." The mission.